Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. Christopher Martinez had stopped believing in ghost stories the same year he stopped believing his father would come home. He was 8 then, old enough to understand that some disappearances had explanations too ordinary to comfort anyone. 23 years later, standing in the ranger station at dawn with coffee burning his tongue, he still preferred hard facts to folklore. The radio crackled. Dispatch to Ranger Martinez. Martinez here. We've got a missing hiker, 26-year-old female Lauren Hayes. Last contact was yesterday at 1700 hours from the Hoh River Trail, approximately mile marker 7. She was solo hiking, planned to camp at Blue Glacier. Family reported her overdue this morning. Chris set down his mug, already calculating. October in the Hoh rainforest meant 14 hours of daylight, temperatures dropping to the low 40s at night. Survivable, but uncomfortable. The trail followed the river for most of its length. Hard to get truly lost if you stayed on it. Any medical conditions? Experience level? Experienced hiker, no known medical issues. She's a graduate student, mycology. Was collecting samples. A scientist. That was good. Scientists didn't panic easily. Chris pulled on his fleece, checked his pack. First aid kit, emergency blanket, satellite phone, handheld GPS, topographic map, water purification tablets, headlamp with extra batteries. His Motorola radio was fully charged. Standard SAR protocol for a day search. I'm heading out ETA to Trailhead 20 minutes. The drive to the Hoh Rainforest Visitor Center took him through corridors of Sitka spruce and western hemlock, so dense the morning sun barely penetrated. Moss hung from every branch in thick curtains, transforming the forest into something primordial. Tourists loved it. Chris found it claustrophobic, all that green pressing in, muffling sound, making distance impossible to judge. He parked at the trailhead and studied the registry. Lauren Hayes had signed in at 09:15 yesterday morning. Her handwriting was neat, controlled. Lauren Hayes, solo, Blue Glacier, return 10:14. Today was the 15th. The trail started level, following the milky green Hoh River through a tunnel of moss-draped maples. Chris moved at a steady pace, eyes scanning for anything unusual. Disturbed vegetation, discarded items, footprints in the mud. At mile marker 3, he keyed his radio. Martinez to dispatch. Trail conditions normal. No signs of disturbance. Copy that. Keep us posted. The forest pressed closer as he hiked deeper. Sword ferns taller than his head crowded the path. Nurse logs, fallen giants hosting entire ecosystems on their decaying backs, forced the trail into serpentine curves. The air tasted like decay and growth happening simultaneously, earth churning itself into something new. At mile marker 7, where Lauren had made her last call, Chris stopped. The trail here skirted a steep embankment down to the river. He examined the area carefully. No broken branches, no scuff marks in the dirt, no sign anyone had slipped or fallen. He pulled out his satellite phone and called the number dispatch had provided. Lauren's mother answered on the first ring. Have you found her? Not yet, ma'am. I'm at her last known location. Can you tell me about your daughter's hiking habits? Does she stick to trails? How does she navigate? She's careful. Always has her GPS. Always tells us her plans. The woman's voice fractured. She called us yesterday afternoon, said she was making good time, that the moss samples were incredible. She sounded happy. What time was that call? 5 o'clock, right before. She stopped. Right before we lost signal. Chris thanked her and continued hiking. The trail climbed steadily now, switchbacking up the valley wall. Elevation 2,200 feet. His breath came harder in the thin air. At mile marker 9, he found something. A backpack. Chris approached carefully, documenting its position with his camera before touching it. The pack leaned against a massive Douglas fir, 20 feet off the trail. Not abandoned, placed. Deliberately set down by someone who expected to return. He opened it. Water bottles, full. Energy bars unopened, rain jacket, and a GPS unit still powered on. Chris activated it. The last waypoint, marked at 5:47 p.m. yesterday. Incredible growth here. Must document. He looked around. The forest here seemed no different than the previous 9 miles. Same moss, same ferns, same trees. What had she seen? He marked the location on his own GPS and keyed his radio. Martinez to dispatch. Found the subject's backpack at mile marker 9. Contents intact. Subject's GPS shows last waypoint approximately 100 yards northeast of trail. I'm going to investigate. Copy. Be careful, Chris. He left the trail, pushing through salal bushes and Oregon grape. The understory was thick here, decades of growth creating layers upon layers. His boots sank into earth so soft it felt sentient. 50 yards in, he found the camera, a digital Canon, expensive, lying in the moss. The LCD screen was cracked, but the power button worked. Chris scrolled through the photos. Mushrooms, dozens of them. Lauren had photographed shelf fungi, coral fungi, delicate white clusters he couldn't name. The shots were meticulous, professional. The timestamps showed she'd been taking pictures until 6:23 p.m., well after her last GPS waypoint. Then the photos changed. 6:31 p.m., a blurred shot of trees. 6:31 p.m., darkness, the flash creating a sphere of white and black. 6:32 p.m. Another darkness shot, but this time, Chris squinted at the screen. Was that a shape? Something pale between the trees? 6:32 p.m., the pale shape closer. Definitely humanoid, possibly another hiker. 6:33 p.m., just forest again, trees and moss. That was the last photo. Chris felt something cold settle in his stomach, and he hated himself for it. This was explainable. Lauren had seen another hiker, probably tried to ask for help, lost her camera in the confusion. Rational, simple. Lauren Hayes. His voice disappeared into the moss. This is Ranger Martinez. If you can hear me, call out. Nothing, not even an echo. The forest swallowed sound here, acoustic dampening so effective it felt artificial. He continued northeast, following a compass bearing. The trees grew larger, older. Some of these Sitka spruce were probably 500 years old, their trunks wider than his car. The moss covering them was so thick he couldn't see bark, just green, endless green, soft and damp and somehow wrong. His radio crackled with static, then cleared. Martinez. Status. Martinez here. I'm about 200 yards northeast of the trail. Found the subject's camera. Photos suggest she encountered another person at approximately 1830 hours. I'm continuing the search pattern. Copy. Getting interference. The signal dissolved into white noise. Chris checked his satellite phone. Full battery, but no signal. That shouldn't be possible. Satellite phones worked anywhere with a clear view of the sky. He looked up. The canopy was dense, yes, but he'd used the sat phone in thicker cover. He marked his position on the GPS and kept moving. The forest changed gradually, so gradually he didn't notice at first. The moss grew thicker. The trees leaned at odd angles. Nurse logs that should have been parallel to the ground tilted upward at impossible degrees, defying rot and gravity. And the light was wrong. It was barely noon, but the forest seemed to be darkening as if dusk were approaching from below rather than above. Lauren! This time he heard something, a response. Faint, distant, but definitely human. Help. Chris froze, every nerve suddenly alert. Lauren? Keep calling. I'll follow your voice. Help, please. Northeast. The voice was coming from northeast. He crashed through the undergrowth, professional caution abandoned. A missing hiker calling for help. This was the good outcome, the one that ended with a rescue, a grateful family, paperwork, and coffee back at the station. Keep talking. I'm coming. Help me. Please. It's so cold. The voice was clearer now. Close. Chris burst through a wall of ferns into a small clearing and stopped. Nothing. No one. just trees and moss and the dim green light filtering through the canopy. His breath came fast, fogging in air that had grown noticeably colder. Had he miscalculated the direction? Sound could do strange things in dense forest, bouncing off trees, creating false echoes. "Lauren? I'm here." Behind him. The voice was behind him now. Chris spun. Nothing. "Please, help me." To his left. No. His right. No. The voice was coming from everywhere, surrounding him, layered like the growth on a nurse log, not echoing, multiplying. "Help, help, help. Where are you?" Chris heard the edge in his own voice and hated it. Stay professional. Stay calm. There was an explanation. Here. 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 The voices overlapped now, slightly out of sync, creating a dissonant chorus that made his teeth ache. Chris pulled out his compass. The needle spun lazily, unable to find north. He tapped it. The needle continued its slow rotation. Magnetic anomaly. That was possible. Iron deposits in the bedrock could disrupt a compass. It happened. "Lauren Hayes, if you can hear me, stay where you are. I'm a park ranger. You're safe now." The voices stopped. The silence that replaced them was absolute. Chris realized he couldn't hear the river anymore. Couldn't hear wind in the trees. Couldn't hear birds or insects or his own breathing. No, wait, he could hear his breathing. He could hear it clearly, but nothing else. The forest had gone completely, impossibly silent. If this story is capturing your attention, follow for more quality content. What would you do in Christopher's situation? Share your thoughts. His radio crackled. Not static this time, but something else. A voice, female, speaking through layers of interference. "Chris." He stared at the radio. No one called him Chris on official channels. It was always Martinez, or Ranger Martinez. "Christopher." That voice. He knew that voice. "Mijo." No, that wasn't possible. "Why didn't you look for me?" Chris dropped the radio. It hit the moss with no sound, just disappeared into the green like a stone into deep water. His hands were shaking. This wasn't happening. This was shock, or dehydration, or... Christopher. Not from the radio now. From the trees. His mother's voice, speaking Spanish like she had when he was small, before the cancer, before everything. "This isn't real." He said it out loud, needing to hear something rational. Auditory hallucination. Stress response not real. "So cold here, mijo. So cold and alone." "Stop it." His voice sounded thin, ineffective. "You're not here. You died in 2003. I was there. I held your hand. You stopped looking for your father. You stopped believing." Chris backed away from the voice, realized he didn't know which direction he'd come from. Every tree looked the same. Every moss-covered trunk. Every fern. The clearing. Where was the clearing? He'd just been in a clearing, but now he was surrounded by dense forest again, as if the space had sealed itself behind him. His GPS. Check the GPS. Follow the waypoints back. He pulled out the unit. The screen showed his position as a blinking dot, in the middle of blank space. No trail, no topographic features, no waypoints, just him, alone, in digital void. "Lauren's here too. She's waiting. She wants to show you." No, Chris forced his mind to work. This was explainable. Had to be. Gas pocket in the soil, methane could cause hallucinations. Or fungi. Lauren was studying fungi. Some species produced psychoactive compounds. He'd read about that. This was biological, chemical, rational. "Christopher." He ran. Branches whipped his face. Ferns caught his legs. He ran anyway, crashing through undergrowth, desperate to find the trail, the river, anything familiar. His pack snagged on something and he shrugged out of it, leaving it behind. Had to get out. Had to... He broke through the trees and nearly fell off a cliff. Chris grabbed a branch and pulled himself back. His heart hammered. He was standing on a ledge, a narrow shelf of rock overlooking a drop he couldn't see the bottom of. This wasn't on the map. The Hoh River Trail didn't have cliffs. It followed the valley floor, gentle grades, no technical terrain. Unless he'd gotten completely turned around, unless he'd climbed without realizing it or descended or... There you are. Chris turned slowly. A woman stood 10 feet away, between two massive spruce trees. She wore hiking clothes, synthetic pants, fleece jacket, boots caked with mud. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a ponytail. She looked completely normal, except for her eyes. Her eyes were wrong, too dark, pupils dilated so wide the irises had disappeared. Lauren Hayes. She smiled. You came looking for me. That's kind. Are you hurt? We need to get you back to the trail. The trail. She tilted her head. I don't remember the trail. Do you remember the trail, Christopher? He hadn't told her his name. How did you... Your mother's very worried. Lauren took a step closer. She's been calling and calling, don't you hear her? Chris's hand moved to his belt, to the canister of bear spray he kept there. Not a weapon, just insurance. Just in case. You should stay back. You might be experiencing... Experiencing? Lauren laughed. The sound was layered, multiple voices speaking in imperfect unison. I'm experiencing everything, the whole forest, every root and spore and dying thing. It's wonderful. Don't you want to experience it? I need you to sit down. I think you've been exposed to... She moved impossibly fast, crossing the distance before he could react. Her hand locked on his wrist. Her skin was cold, far too cold, but her grip was strong. It's hungry, she whispered. It's been hungry for so long. The forest feeds it scraps, beetles, mice, deer when it's lucky. But it prefers us. Human minds are so rich, so full. It could feed for months on one of us. Chris tried to pull away. Couldn't. Her fingers were like iron. Lauren, listen to me. Whatever you think is happening, I thought like you once. Her dark eyes bored into his. Rational, scientific. Everything has an explanation. Then I found the growth, the real growth deep under the moss. Mycelium networks 1,000 years old, all connecting to something at the center. Something that learned to think, to want, to call. You're not well. Let me help you. Help? She pulled him closer. He could smell earth on her, rich and deep. It helped me. Showed me what's underneath everything. The decay, feeding the growth, feeding the decay. We're just part of the cycle, Christopher. The forest eats us all eventually. Why wait? He yanked his wrist hard, felt something tear. Lauren stumbled backward and disappeared. Not walked away. Disappeared. There one moment, gone the next, as if she'd never been there at all. Chris stood on the ledge, breathing hard, staring at the space where she'd been. His wrist throbbed. He looked down. 4 perfect finger-shaped bruises, already darkening to purple. Real. Those bruises were real. His radio, still lying in the moss 20 yards back, crackled to life. Martina, do you copy? Dispatch. Real voices. Real people. He ran back, grabbed the radio. Martina's here. I found her. Lauren Hayes is alive, but she's... What was she? Infected? Possessed? She's experiencing severe psychological distress. Possible toxic exposure. I need immediate evac and medical support. Can't... Signal... Poor. Did you copy? I found her. She's... The radio died. Completely dead, despite a full battery indicator. Chris looked around. The forest had grown darker still. The light was fading, but his watch showed only 12:47 p.m. Hours of daylight left. Hours. He tried his satellite phone. No signal. His GPS. Blank screen. His compass. Needle spinning. Every piece of technology failing simultaneously. Not possible, he said to the forest. Not possible. The forest said nothing. But beneath his feet, he felt something. A vibration, subtle and rhythmic. Like breathing, like something vast and patient stirring beneath the earth. Chris closed his eyes, opened them. The rational part of his mind was screaming that this was explainable, must be explainable. Everything has an explanation. But the older part, the part that remembered being 8 years old and terrified of the dark, was screaming something else entirely. He had two choices. Stay here, wait for rescue, trust that dispatch would send a team when he didn't check in. Or move, try to find the trail, get out under his own power. The vibration beneath his feet increased just slightly. Chris moved. He picked a direction, south, he thought, based on the sun's position through the canopy, and walked. Deliberately, calmly. A hiker returning from a day trip, nothing unusual. If he acted normal, maybe normal would reassert itself. The forest had other ideas. Trees moved. Not obviously. He never saw them actually shift position. But he'd pass a distinctive nurse log and then pass it again 5 minutes later from a different angle. Trails would appear, tempting footpaths through the ferns, and then dead end at walls of impenetrable salal. The cliff would appear ahead of him, forcing him to turn back, even though he was certain he'd been moving away from it. And the voices continued. His mother, his father, Lauren, other voices he didn't recognize. Decades of lost hikers maybe, or centuries of lost souls. They called from the trees, from beneath the moss, from everywhere and nowhere. Christopher, help us. So hungry. Join us. He walked faster, then ran, then stopped running because he realized he'd passed the same tree 3 times and running wasn't helping. Think. He was a ranger, trained for this. Not for supernatural bullshit, because that's what this was, supernatural, impossible, not real, but for survival situations. When technology fails, use nature. Moss grows on the north side of trees. Water flows downhill. Follow water and you'll find people. Chris looked for moss. Found it on all sides of every tree. Looked for water. The ground was saturated. Water everywhere and nowhere. Looked for any sign of human passage and found only trees and green and that terrible soft moss that absorbed everything. Sound, light, hope. His watch showed 3 p.m., then 3 p.m. again, then 12:47 p.m. Time was breaking down. Okay, he said it to the forest, to himself, to whatever was listening. Okay, you want me? Here I am. I'm lost. I admit it. I don't understand what's happening. Are you happy? I don't have an explanation. The forest held its breath. But Lauren Hayes was a real person. She had a family, a mother who loved her. And I'm a real person. I had... What did he have? No family left. No wife, no kids. Just a job and an apartment and a certainty that the world made sense. I have a responsibility. To find her. To get us both out. Silence. So if you're intelligent, if you can understand me, let me do my job. Let me help her. Please. Nothing. Then, slowly, a gap appeared in the trees ahead. Not a clearing, not a trail, just a space, an absence of forest, leading in a specific direction. Chris didn't trust it, couldn't trust it, but he had no other options. He walked through the gap. The forest opened around him, trees stepping back like theater curtains, revealing what they'd been hiding. A circle of ancient Sitka spruce, trunks so massive they formed a natural cathedral. At the center, a growth, the growth Lauren had mentioned. It emerged from the earth like a tumor, a mass of fungal bodies woven together into something that couldn't exist. White and gray and brown, pulsing with some internal rhythm, spreading across the ground in networks so complex they looked intentional, designed. And at the edge of the growth, Lauren, kneeling, her hands buried in the mycelial mat. Lauren. She turned, smiled. You came. It knew you would. We need to leave. Now. Why? She looked genuinely curious. What's out there? Jobs and bills and the slow decay of aging? Here, everything makes sense. The forest feeds on us, we feed the forest. Circle of life. Simple. That's not life. That's parasitism. What's the difference? She stood, and Chris saw that the growth clung to her skin, fine white threads connecting her to the mass. It's been here for thousands of years, Christopher, growing, learning, waiting. Do you know what mycelium networks can do? They transmit information, make decisions, form memories. This one's been absorbing the forest for millennia, and everyone who dies in it. We don't disappear. We become part of something bigger. Lauren, listen. It showed me my father. Her voice cracked. He died when I was 12. I never got to say goodbye. But it pulled him from my memories, let me hear his voice again. It gave me that gift. All it wants in return is connection. Chris understood then. This wasn't possession. It was seduction. The thing in the ground, whether fungal network or something older, something that had learned to think through centuries of slow growth, wasn't forcing anyone. It was offering comfort, connection, an end to loneliness. And he was alone, wasn't he? Had been alone since his mother died, maybe since his father left. No one was waiting for him. No one would truly miss him. The thought appeared fully formed, and he recognized it immediately as not his own. Get out of my head. The forest pulsed. Christopher, his mother's voice tender and sad. I'm here, mijo. I never left. Let me hold you again. He wanted to believe it. God, he wanted to believe it so badly his chest ached. But he'd watched his mother die, held her hand as the morphine pulled. The phone rang at 11:47 p.m., pulling Christopher Hayes from the kind of half-sleep that had become his default state over the past 8 years. Not quite rest, not quite waking, just a gray space where the mind processed things it refused to acknowledge in daylight. Hayes. His voice came out rougher than intended. Mr. Hayes, this is David Chen, my daughter. The man's voice cracked, reformed. Amanda. She went hiking in the Ho 4 days ago. She was supposed to check in Wednesday night. We haven't heard from her. The rangers, they're saying they need to wait for daylight, but you know that forest. Everyone says you know it better than anyone. Chris sat up, the familiar weight settling across his shoulders. The Ho rainforest. Of course it was the Ho. He reached for the lamp, squinting against the sudden brightness. On his desk, beneath a stack of incident reports, the corner of an old photograph peeked out. A reminder he kept meaning to throw away but never did. Mr. Chen, the search and rescue team is very capable. They'll start at first light with... She left a voicemail. The father's desperation cut through the standard reassurance. Wednesday evening. It cuts off mid-sentence. She sounds... Mr. Hayes, she sounds confused, disoriented. My daughter is a biology teacher. She knows wilderness protocol. Something's wrong. Chris closed his eyes. In his mind, the trees were already forming. Those massive Sitka spruce draped in moss like burial shrouds. The way sound moved strangely through the dense canopy, arriving from directions that made no geometric sense. The Ho had its own rules. He'd learned that the hard way. Send me the coordinates of her last known location in that voicemail, Chris heard himself say. I'll be there in 40 minutes. After he hung up, Chris sat motionless for a full minute, staring at nothing. Then he pulled out the photograph he'd been avoiding. 5 faces smiled back at him from 2001. His old search team, standing victorious after finding a lost Boy Scout troop. All of them were still alive in that photo, still whole. He dressed in the dark, checking his gear with practiced efficiency. Garmin E-Trex GPS unit, fully charged. Silva Ranger compass, the old reliable kind that didn't need batteries. Streamlight Survivor LED headlamp with spare batteries. His Motorola two-way radio felt heavy on his belt, though he knew from experience that the radio would be useless once he got deep enough into the Ho. The moisture and density played havoc with signals. His truck's headlights cut through the October mist as he drove Highway 101 south. This time of year, the peninsula existed in perpetual twilight. The sun barely made it above the horizon before sliding back down. Good for the moss, bad for everything else. The voicemail arrived as he passed Lake Quinault. Chris pulled over, dreading what he was about to hear. Amanda Chen's voice was steady at first. "Hi, Dad. Hi, Mom. Making camp near the Elk Creek Junction, about 3 miles past the visitor center. The forest here is incredible. The moss is so thick you could sleep on it. I'm going to explore a bit more before dark. Maybe check out the old growth grove near..." A pause. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted into something Chris recognized, the careful steadiness of someone trying not to panic. "That's strange. I could have sworn I heard you, Dad, calling my name from the North Trail. But that's impossible, you're in Seattle. Must be another hiker. Anyway, signal's getting spotty, so I'll..." The message cut off with a burst of static. Chris played it 3 more times, listening for details others might miss. The ambient sound changed halfway through, the quality of the silence behind her words. In the first part, he could hear the normal forest sounds, distant raven calls, the whisper of wind through branches. In the second part, after she mentioned hearing her father's voice, there was nothing. Complete acoustic dead space, as if she'd stepped into a vacuum. He knew that silence. He'd heard it before. Chris reached the Hoh Rainforest Visitor Center at 1:30 a.m. The parking lot was empty except for a silver Honda Civic with Washington plates, Amanda's car presumably. He swept his flashlight across the interior through the windows. Organized, clean. A stack of field guides on the passenger seat, university parking permit on the dashboard. No signs of distress or hasty departure. The trail register showed her last entry. Amanda Chen, solo day hike, Elk Creek Loop, Oct. 21, 2:15 p.m. That was 4 days ago. The entries after hers showed a couple from Portland who'd hiked the same day and returned by 5 p.m. Then nothing until yesterday when a ranger had noted no sign of Chen, grid search planned for dawn. Chris clicked on his headlamp and started into the forest. The trail was well maintained near the visitor's center, but he knew it would deteriorate quickly. The Hoh wasn't designed for easy access. Over 160 inches of rainfall annually created a prehistoric landscape where nurse logs became gardens for new trees, where everything grew on top of everything else in an endless cycle of decay and renewal. His boots made soft sounds on the moss-covered path. Within 10 minutes, the temperature dropped 15 degrees, and the darkness became absolute beyond his light's narrow beam. The air smelled of wet earth and decomposition, rich and almost sweet. At the half-mile marker, Chris stopped. Something felt off about the trail, though he couldn't immediately identify what. He'd walked this path hundreds of times, knew every route and turn. But tonight the spacing seemed wrong. The distances between familiar landmarks didn't match his internal map. He checked his GPS. According to the coordinates, he was exactly where he should be. But his instincts said otherwise. "Ranger Hayes?" The voice came from ahead, feminine and clear. Chris's hand moved to his radio before he processed what he'd heard. There shouldn't be anyone out here at this hour. Certainly not anyone who knew his name. "Who's there?" He aimed his light forward, seeing only the tunnel of trees and hanging moss. "I'm so glad you came." The voice was closer now, maybe 20 yards ahead. "I knew you'd understand. You've seen them too, haven't you?" Amanda Chen. It had to be. But the tone was wrong. Too calm, too knowing. Chris moved forward cautiously, his other hand on his canister of bear spray, even though he knew, deep in his gut, that bear spray wouldn't help with whatever this was. "Amanda, I'm here to help you. Your parents are worried. Can you step into the light?" "They're always here, you know." The voice shifted slightly to his left, though he hadn't seen any movement. "The ones who got lost. They never really leave. They just become part of the forest, part of the green." Chris's pulse kicked up. He'd heard these kinds of statements before 8 years ago from Marcus, his partner who'd been found 3 days after disappearing, sitting against a western hemlock with his eyes open but unseeing, muttering about voices in the moss. Marcus had never fully recovered. He'd retired on disability, moved to Arizona where the landscape was empty and the silence made sense. Amanda, I need you to stay where you are. I'm going to come to you. Keep talking so I can locate you. But I am talking, the voice said, now from behind him. Chris spun, his light sweeping across the trail he'd just walked. Nothing. Just the endless repetition of dark trunks and hanging moss, each tree identical to the last. If this story is holding your attention, follow for more quality content. What would you do in Christopher's situation? Share your thoughts below. He pulled out his compass, needing something analog, something that couldn't be affected by whatever was happening. The needle spun lazily before settling on north, or what his compass claimed was north. Chris had a sickening feeling that direction had become negotiable out here. You came back, the voice said now to his right. After what happened to Marcus, after you promised yourself you'd never go deep into the hoe again. But you came back anyway. Why? Because someone needs help, Chris said, keeping his voice level even as his mind raced. Because it's my job. Is that what you told yourself when you left Marcus here? When you ran? The words hit like a physical blow. Chris had never told anyone the full truth of that night in 2001. The official report said he'd gone for backup when his partner became disoriented. But the real truth was simpler and more damning. He'd been terrified. He'd heard the voices, dozens of them, all calling his name in tones that were almost but not quite right. And he'd broken. He'd left Marcus sitting against that tree and he'd run, following his compass out of the forest while his partner descended into whatever hell existed in these woods. That's not you, Chris said firmly. Amanda Chen doesn't know about Marcus. She doesn't know about any of that. We know everything that happens here. The voice had multiplied now, coming from multiple directions at once, slightly out of sync like a round sung by an unskilled choir. We are everyone who stayed, everyone who became part of the green. Marcus almost joined us. You could feel it happening to him, couldn't you? The way the forest was taking him, one memory at a time. You were right to run, Christopher. You weren't ready then, but you came back. That means you might be ready now. Chris forced himself to breathe slowly, applying every piece of training he had for managing fear. This was psychological warfare, nothing more. The forest couldn't know his thoughts. It couldn't. July 14th, 1997, the voices said, perfectly synchronized now. The Elwha River. Your daughter Sarah, 8 years old. She wanted to cross on the stepping stones. You told her it was too dangerous, but she went anyway. She slipped. You pulled her out, but for 7 seconds that felt like 7 years, you thought she was gone. You dream about those 7 seconds. You dream about the moment when you couldn't see her, couldn't reach her, and you knew you'd failed. Chris's legs nearly buckled. He grabbed a moss-covered tree for support, the wet vegetation cold and strangely warm at the same time under his palm. Sarah was 20 now, studying environmental science at University of Washington. She was alive and whole and perfect. But yes, he dreamed about those 7 seconds. Sometimes he dreamed that he hadn't been fast enough, that the river had taken her, and he woke up gasping. How could anything know that? We're in the spaces between, the voices explained, sounding almost gentle now. Between memory and reality. Between what happened and what might have happened. That's where we live, Christopher. In the cracks of the world. And the cracks are bigger in the hoe. The boundaries are thinner. You felt it 8 years ago. You feel it now. The forest remembers everything. The forest is everything. Where is Amanda Chen? Chris managed, pushing away from the tree. The real Amanda, not whatever you are. A sound like laughter rippled through the darkness. Multiple voices finding humor in slightly different registers, creating a chord of amusement that made Chris's teeth ache. Real? What's real, Christopher? Is the memory of your daughter drowning real? It feels real when you dream it. Your body reacts as if it happened. Your grief is genuine, so what makes it less real than the version where you saved her? Because one happened and one didn't, Chris said, though even as he spoke, he felt his certainty wavering. We all happened, the voices insisted. Every version, Every possibility. In 1889, 17 men came into this forest searching for a route to the coast. They got lost, they starved, they turned on each other. On the final night, huddled together in the hollow of a fallen cedar, they heard voices offering salvation. They followed the voices deeper into the green. Their bodies were never found, but their consciousness remained, Christopher, trapped in that final moment of hope and desperation, forever walking toward a salvation that never arrives. Despite himself, Chris found the story pulling at him. He knew about the 1889 expedition. It was part of local lore, one of the peninsula's many unsolved mysteries. "That's you?" he asked. "The expedition?" "We are them. We are also the logger from 1934 who walked into the fog and never came back. We are the graduate student from 1967 who was researching endemic species and was found standing in Elk Creek, unable to explain how she'd lost 3 days. We are Marcus, partly. He gave us enough of himself that we can still access his memories. And we are Amanda Chen." "Is she alive?" Silence. For the first time since the voices began, Chris heard the forest again. The drip of water from moss, the creak of branches overhead, the rustle of something small moving through the undergrowth. "Alive is another one of those negotiable concepts," the voices finally said. "Her body still functions, her heart still beats, but she's been walking toward us for 3 days now and she's almost here. Almost ready to join. Once she does, she'll be alive in every moment simultaneously. She'll be the Amanda who came to the Ho in 2009, and the Amanda who stayed forever, and the Amanda who never came at all. All versions, all possibilities, all real." "Take me to her," Chris demanded. "Now." "We've been taking you to her this whole time," the voices said. And Chris realized with creeping horror that they were right. He was no longer on the main trail. At some point during the conversation, he'd walked off the established path into the true old growth, where trees older than the nation itself grew from the corpses of their predecessors, where the moss was so thick it erased the line between ground and air. His GPS showed him moving in circles, but that couldn't be right, because he'd been walking in what felt like a straight line. Unless direction itself had become meaningless, the voices had herded him, distracted him with memories and philosophy while leading him exactly where they wanted him to go. The same way they'd done with Marcus, the same way they'd done with Amanda. "You're getting close now," the voices confirmed. "Can you feel it? The way the air changes when you approach the center, the way sound stops working properly. This is the heart of us, Christopher, the place where all the lost ones converge." Chris's light illuminated a clearing ahead, though clearing wasn't quite right. It was more like a cathedral created by fallen trees and standing trunks, with a ceiling of moss and branches that blocked out even the faint moonlight. In the center stood a western red cedar so massive it seemed impossible, its trunk easily 20 feet in diameter. The moss on its bark grew in patterns that looked almost like faces, dozens of them, hundreds, all watching. And at the base of the cedar, sitting with her back against the bark and her knees drawn to her chest, was a young woman in hiking clothes. Her eyes were open, reflecting his light like a nocturnal animal's. "Amanda?" Chris approached slowly, looking for signs of injury. She appeared unharmed. No visible wounds, no signs of exposure despite 4 days in the October cold. But something about her stillness felt wrong. "Hello, Christopher," she said, and her voice was the one he'd been hearing, except now he could see it coming from a human mouth. "They told me you would come. They told me you were one of the ones who got away, and that bothered them. They don't like loose ends." "I'm going to get you out of here," Chris said, keeping his voice calm despite the panic clawing at his chest. "Your parents are worried. They want you home." Amanda smiled, but it wasn't quite right. Like someone who'd learned the expression from a book but had never felt the emotion behind it. Home. That's a funny concept. I have so many homes now. I have every home I've ever lived in, all at once. The apartment in Seattle where I grew up, the dorm at college, the house in Tacoma where I teach. They're all real. They're all happening simultaneously. It's beautiful, Christopher. You can't imagine how beautiful it is to exist in every moment at once. Chris knelt beside her, checking her pulse. It was steady but slow, her skin cool but not dangerously so. Medically, she seemed stable. Mentally, that was another question. Amanda, I need you to listen to me. You're experiencing severe disorientation, possibly hypothermia-induced confusion. This feeling you're describing, existing in multiple places at once, that's your brain trying to cope with extreme stress. But I can help you. We just need to get you moving, get you warm, and... You don't believe that, she interrupted gently. You stopped believing in simple explanations 8 years ago when Marcus started talking about the voices. You've spent 8 years trying to convince yourself that what happened to him was medical, psychological, anything but what you know it really was. But you know, Christopher, deep down, you know. The worst part was she was right. Chris had written reports, attended counseling sessions, read every article about temporal lobe seizures and wilderness-induced psychosis. He'd tried so hard to fit what happened into a framework that made sense, but none of it ever felt true. Why me? He asked, surprising himself with the question. If you wanted another person to add to your collection, there are hundreds of hikers in this forest. Why target me specifically? The thing wearing Amanda's face tilted its head, considering. Because you're already partly ours. You left a piece of yourself here when you abandoned Marcus. Every time you dream about that night, you're reaching back toward us. And with each year that passes, you pull a little closer. We're patient, Christopher. We've been here since the trees were saplings. We can wait. But you didn't wait, Chris noted. You took Amanda to draw me back. We took Amanda because she was sensitive to us, because she walked past the cedar on the first day and heard us singing, and she was curious instead of frightened. Most people run when they hear the first whispers. Amanda listened. She asked questions. She was trying to record us on her phone when the battery died. The smile widened. We knew when we met her that she'd be perfect, and we knew that her disappearance would bring you back. 2 additions for the price of 1. Around them, the moss-covered faces on the cedar seemed to shift and move in the edge of Chris's vision. When he looked directly at them, they were just patterns in the bark. But peripherally, they were watching, waiting. Chris stood, making a decision. I'm not joining you, and I'm not letting you keep her. You don't have a choice, Amanda said, her voice harmonizing with itself now, multiple versions speaking in imperfect unison. You're already in the heart, the center, the place where the boundaries dissolve. Every second you spend here, you become a little less yourself and a little more us. Can't you feel it? The way your memories are starting to blur? The way you can't quite remember if you drove here tonight or if you've been here all along. And God help him, Chris could feel it. His certainty was eroding. Had he driven here? Or had he been walking for days just like Amanda? When was the last time he was sure about anything? He grabbed his compass, clinging to it like a lifeline. The needle spun wildly, unable to find north. Useless. He tried his GPS, but the screen showed him in 3 different locations simultaneously, the coordinates flickering between impossible readings. Technology can't help you here, Amanda said kindly. The rules are different in the heart. Direction is arbitrary. Time is negotiable. The only real thing is us. Chris closed his eyes, trying to center himself. He was Christopher Hayes, 42 years old, forest ranger for 17 years. Father to Sarah. Ex-husband to Jennifer. He lived in Forks, Washington. He drove a 2005 Ford Ranger. He drank his coffee black. These were facts. These were real. But were they? How did he know? Memory was just electrical impulses, neurons firing in patterns. What made his memories more real than the memories of the 17 men from 1889? What made his present more valid than their eternal moment of hope and desperation? Stop it, he whispered. Stop. We're not doing anything, the voices said. And now they were coming from everywhere, from the moss, from the trees, from the air itself. This is just what happens when you stay too long in the places between. The boundaries dissolve. You see the bigger picture. You understand that the story you've been telling yourself about your life is just one possibility among infinite possibilities, and none of them are more true than any other. Chris opened his eyes. Amanda was standing now, her hand extended toward him. "Come with us," she said. "Stop fighting, stop running, join us in the green, Christopher. We'll take the weight from you, all those decisions you regret, all those moments you wish you could change. We'll show you the versions where you made different choices. You can live them all. You can be everything you might have been. It would be so easy. Just take her hand. Let go. Stop carrying the burden of being one singular person moving in one singular direction through time." The voices were offering him multiplicity, possibility, freedom from the tyranny of linear existence. He thought of Marcus, sitting against that tree, eyes open but unseeing, living in every moment at once. And Chris had thought his partner was lost, broken. But what if Marcus had found something? What if this was transcendence? His hand began to move toward Amanda's, and then he felt it, his pocket vibrating, his phone. Even without signal, it still kept time, and the vibration meant it was midnight. October 26th had become October 27th, Sarah's birthday. His daughter was turning 21 today. The thought cut through the fog like his headlamp through the dark. Sarah was real. Sarah existed in one timeline, moving forward in one direction, aging one day at a time. And she would wake up this morning expecting a call from her father. If he stayed here in the spaces between, living every possibility at once, he wouldn't be there to make that call. He would be every version of himself simultaneously, including the version that lost Sarah to the Elwha River in 1997. He would have to live that moment forever, feel that grief eternally, alongside all the other moments. He couldn't do that, wouldn't do that. "No," Chris said, his voice stronger now. "You're wrong. The boundaries aren't arbitrary. The present isn't negotiable. I am Christopher Hayes, and I exist here now in October 2009, and my daughter is turning 21 today. That's real. That's what matters." The voices around him shifted, surprise, then anger, then something that might have been respect. "You're choosing limitation," Amanda said, her expression unreadable. "You're choosing one timeline when you could have them all." "I'm choosing the timeline where I can call my daughter on her birthday," Chris corrected. "I'm choosing forward over sideways, and I'm taking Amanda Chen back with me, whether you like it or not." He grabbed Amanda's wrist, her actual physical wrist, and felt her real flesh, cold but solid. She gasped, and for just a second he saw confusion in her eyes. The real Amanda trapped somewhere behind the voice's influence, recognizing that someone was trying to pull her back. The forest erupted around them. The faces in the moss shrieked. Or maybe it was the wind through the branches, or maybe there was no difference anymore. The ground seemed to tilt, and Chris had the vertigo-inducing sensation of standing in multiple places at once. The Cedar Cathedral overlapping with the main trail, his truck, his house, the Elwha River in 1997. But he held on to Amanda's wrist. He held on to the physical, the tangible, the real. "Follow me," he commanded. "Walk. Put one foot in front of the other. Don't listen to them. Just walk." He pulled her forward, away from the cedar. She resisted at first, but her body remembered how to move, how to follow. Behind them, the voices were howling now. 17 men from 1889, a logger from 1934, a graduate student from 1967, and dozens of others, all screaming in unison about loss and abandonment and the cruelty of singular existence. Chris walked. He didn't use his compass or his GPS. He didn't trust the trail markers. He simply walked in the direction that felt like leaving, like forward, like away. And somehow, through luck or instinct or something else entirely, he found the path. The voices followed them for what might have been hours or might have been minutes. They promised peace. They threatened torment. They pleaded for understanding. They raged at betrayal. But gradually, as the forest thinned and the first gray light of dawn began to filter through the canopy, the voices faded. By the time Chris and Amanda reached the visitor center parking lot at 6:17 a.m., the only sounds were ordinary. Ravens calling, wind in the branches, and Amanda Chen crying quietly as her mind began to remember which timeline was real. Chris drove Amanda to Forks Community Hospital, where a doctor confirmed what Chris already knew. Physically, she was fine. Dehydrated, exhausted, but unharmed. Psychologically, that would take longer to assess. She kept talking about being in multiple places at once, about hearing her parents' voices calling from the forest, about faces in the moss. The doctors thought it was exposure-induced psychosis. They would keep her for observation, contact her family, start the process of recovery. Chris didn't correct their diagnosis. What would be the point? He gave his statement to the sheriff's office, kept it simple. He'd found her disoriented near the old growth grove, brought her out. Yes, she'd been talking strangely. No, he didn't know what had caused her confusion. Yes, he recommended a psychological evaluation. Everything by the book. At noon, he was finally alone in his truck. He sat in the hospital parking lot, hands shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off. His phone showed 17 missed calls, mostly from the ranger station, and one reminder, Sarah's birthday. He dialed before he could overthink it. Dad! Sarah's voice was warm, alive, beautifully singular. I was starting to worry. Mom said you were on a search and rescue? Found her, Chris said, his voice rough. She's okay, and happy birthday, honey. 21, that's old, Sarah laughed. I'm ancient now. You're perfect, Chris said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. Perfect and real, and existing in exactly one timeline, moving forward at exactly 1 second per second. Listen, I know we planned dinner next week, but can I take you out tonight instead? The radio crackled at 6:47 a.m., pulling Robert Hayes from a sleep that hadn't offered rest in years. Ranger Hayes, we have a situation at Hoh Rainforest Trailhead. Female hiker, 28, didn't return to camp last night. Group waited until dawn to report. You're closest. Robert's hand found the transmitter before his eyes fully opened. Copy that. Hannah Mitchell? A pause. How did you? Saw the permit yesterday. Solo photography trek. He was already pulling on his olive drab pants, hands steady despite the familiar tightness in his chest. The dreams had been worse lately. Always the same forest, the same voice calling his name, the same moment when he'd turned around and seen nothing but moss and shadow. Affirmative. Last known position, junction of Hoh River Trail and Blue Glacier route. She told friends she wanted dawn shots of the mist. Robert checked his watch. A Sunto vector his father had given him before the old man died. 7:03 a.m. Hannah had been missing at least 14 hours, probably longer. The temperature had dropped to 38 degrees overnight. He grabbed his pack, already loaded with the SAR essentials. Garmin GPS, first aid kit, emergency blanket, high-calorie bars, water purification tablets, headlamp with extra batteries. His Motorola XPR 7550 radio, reliable but not infallible in the deep forest. A compass that had never failed him, even when everything else had. The drive to the trailhead took 40 minutes on Highway 101, the road cutting through stands of Sitka spruce and western hemlock. Morning fog clung to the pavement like something alive. Robert's fingers drummed against the steering wheel. Not nervousness, just the need to keep moving, to stay ahead of thoughts that could pull him under. 3 years ago, almost to the day, he'd lost a hiker in these woods. Trevor Morrison, 34, experienced outdoorsman. They'd found Trevor's backpack, his camera, even his boots, neatly placed on a fallen log as if he'd decided to walk barefoot into the wilderness. But never Trevor. And Robert had heard it that day, the voice that sounded exactly like his own dispatcher, calling him deeper into the forest, away from the search grid. He'd followed it for 2 hours before realizing his radio had been dead the entire time. No one believed him. Not the investigation board, not his supervisor, not even his wife before she left. They called it stress, suggested counseling, put him on administrative leave until the psychiatrist cleared him. The official report used words like disorientation and auditory hallucination brought on by extreme fatigue. But Robert knew what he'd heard. And he'd heard it again last week, during a routine patrol near the Queets River. His mother's voice, though she'd been dead for 6 years, asking him to come closer, to step off the trail, to see what she'd found. He'd run. The parking area at Horain Forest held 3 vehicles: a blue Honda Civic registered to Hannah Mitchell, a Ford pickup, and a Subaru Outback that probably belonged to her friends. 2 men and a woman stood near the trailhead, their faces drawn tight with the particular exhaustion that comes from a night spent listening to forest sounds and imagining the worst. Ranger Hayes? The taller man stepped forward, mid-30s, Seattle Seahawks cap pulled low. I'm Derek Chen. This is Marcus Webb and Sarah Jennings. We're here with Hannah. Robert shook their hands, noting the details. Derek's grip too firm, overcompensating for fear. Marcus's eyes red-rimmed. Sarah wearing Hannah's jacket, the sleeves too long. Tell me exactly what happened. Hannah wanted to catch the sunrise mist, Sarah said, her voice cracking slightly. She did nature photography for magazines. National Geographic published her work last year. She's careful, experienced. She had all the right gear. When did you last see her? Yesterday around 5 p.m. We set up camp about 2 miles in, near the visitor shelter. Hannah said she'd scout locations, be back by dark. Derek pulled out his phone, showed Robert a photo. Hannah Mitchell, dark hair pulled back, genuine smile, holding a Nikon D810 with a 24-70mm lens. Professional equipment. She texted at 6:15 that she'd found a good spot. That was the last we heard. Robert studied the screen, memorizing her face. Show me the text. Found something incredible near the junction. Mist rolling through moss like smoke. We'll get shots, then head back. Don't wait up if I'm slow. The message included a dropped pin, latitude 478607, longitude 1238947. Robert entered the coordinates into his GPS. 3.2 miles northeast, elevation gain of 800 feet. The terrain there got complicated. Old-growth forest so thick that GPS signals bounced uselessly between canopy and ground. Did she have a GPS device, a spot beacon? Marcus shook his head. Just her phone. But she knew, the trails. She's hiked here before. Robert didn't correct the tense shift. People did that when hope started failing. Anyone else on the trail yesterday? Other hikers you saw? An older couple around noon, Sarah said. They were heading out as we went in, and maybe someone else. We heard voices around 3 p.m. but never saw anyone. Voices, male, female. Female, I think. Distant, like someone calling out. We figured it was someone on another trail. Something cold settled in Robert's stomach. What exactly did you hear? Sarah glanced at Derek. It sounded like someone calling a name, but we couldn't make out what name. It echoed weird through the trees. Robert forced his expression neutral, professional. I need you to stay here. If Hannah comes back or if anyone else shows up looking for her, call dispatch immediately. Don't try to follow me in. Understood? They nodded, relief and guilt mixing in their faces. Relief that someone else was taking responsibility. Guilt for feeling relieved. Robert adjusted his pack straps and started up the trail. The Horain Forest lived up to its name. Everything dripped with moisture. Moss coating every surface like green velvet. Nurse logs hosting entire ecosystems of ferns and seedlings. The air smelled of rot and growth. That particular Pacific Northwest perfume of things dying and being reborn simultaneously. Banana slugs left silver trails across the path. A varied thrush called somewhere overhead, its song haunting and mechanical. The trail rose gradually, switchbacking through stands of old growth that had been here when Lewis and Clark reached the coast. Some of these trees were over 500 years old, their trunks 20 feet across at the base. Robert's boots, Danner Mountain Light 2s broken in but not worn out, found purchase on roots worn smooth by decades of hikers. He maintained a steady pace, not rushing, conserving energy for the long haul. His breathing fell into rhythm with his steps, meditation born of necessity. At the 1-mile marker, he paused to check his GPS. Signal strength was good, battery at 90%. He pulled out his radio. Dispatch, this is Hayes. I'm 1 mile in, continuing to last known coordinates. Static answered him. He adjusted the frequency, tried again. More static with something underneath it. Not quite white noise, not quite silence. Robert's jaw tightened. The radio had worked fine at the trailhead. He continued on. The forest grew denser, the canopy closing overhead like cathedral vaulting. Light filtered down in dusty columns, illuminating particles that might have been spore clouds or might have been something else. Robert's senses sharpened, a survival instinct honed by years in the wilderness. He noted everything. Fresh deer scat near a huckleberry bush, the distant gurgle of the Ho River somewhere to his west, the way the ferns grew thicker on the north-facing slopes, and the silence. Not complete. The forest was never truly silent, but a particular absence of certain sounds. No Douglas squirrels chattering their territorial claims. No ravens croaking from the treetops, just the drip of condensation and the whisper of wind through moss. At 2 miles, he found the first sign. A piece of fabric snagged on a salal branch. Blue synthetic material, modern outdoor gear. Robert carefully freed it, held it up to catch the light. A torn piece from a rain jacket sleeve, edges ragged like it had been pulled rather than cut. He bagged it, marked the location on his GPS, and examined the surrounding area. No footprints in the mulch, too much leaf litter, but branches broken at shoulder height pointing northeast. Off the main trail. Hannah had left the path here. Robert studied the terrain ahead. The forest floor sloped down into a ravine thick with sword ferns and devil's club, their thorns capable of causing infections that lasted weeks. Beyond that, he could see the darker green of even older growth, trees that had stood when the Ho people first walked these forests. He pulled out his compass, checked his bearing. Northeast toward the coordinates Hannah had sent. But there was no trail here, just wilderness. Professional protocol said to call for backup, establish a proper search grid, wait for additional rangers and the SAR team from Port Angeles. But that would take hours, and Hannah had already been out here through one night. The temperature was dropping again, clouds building toward another storm. She had 12 hours at most before hypothermia became irreversible, assuming she wasn't already hurt. Robert keyed his radio again. Dispatch, I'm going off trail, bearing 045. Have found evidence of... Robert. His mother's voice came through the speaker, clear as glass, gentle as memory. Robert, sweetheart, I'm waiting for you. Just a little further. His finger released the transmit button. The radio fell silent, then crackled back to normal static. Robert stared at it, his pulse visible in his wrist, his breathing shallow despite every mental technique he'd learned in 3 years of therapy. Not real. Auditory hallucination. Stress response. His psychiatrist's voice, calm and professional, explained the neurology of it. How the brain under extreme stress could create sensory experiences indistinguishable from reality. How isolation and fear could trigger the temporal lobe to produce voices. How... Robert, please. She needs you. Hannah needs you. This time it came from ahead, deeper in the forest. Not from the radio, from between the trees. Robert's hand found the can of bear spray on his hip, useless against whatever this was, but the weight of it was comforting. He thought about turning back, calling for that backup, explaining to the board that he'd heard voices again, watching them exchange those looks, seeing the disappointment in his supervisor's face. Or he could keep going. Find Hannah, prove that he wasn't losing his mind, that something real existed in these woods, something that took people and left only mysteries behind. He stepped off the trail. The forest closed around him like water. Within 10 feet, the path behind had disappeared, swallowed by ferns and shadows. Robert moved carefully, testing each step, avoiding the Devil's Club and maintaining his bearing. The GPS showed 1.8 miles to Hannah's coordinates, but straight-line distance meant nothing here. He'd have to navigate around ravines, over fallen logs, through thickets that seemed designed to disorient. The temperature was dropping. Robert could see his breath now, though it was April and should have been warming. Moisture condensed on his jacket, soaking through despite the water-resistant treatment. His fingers felt numb in his gloves. After 30 minutes of bushwhacking, he found Hannah's camera. It sat on a flat rock, perfectly centered, lens cap in place. The Nikon D810, thousands of dollars of equipment just sitting there like someone had carefully set it down before walking away. Robert approached slowly, scanning the surrounding area for any sign of struggle. Nothing. No disturbed soil, no broken branches, no indication that anything had happened here. He picked up the camera, pressed the power button. Dead battery, despite the indicator showing it had been at 70% charge when Hannah had last posted to Instagram. He'd checked her social media before leaving the station. He opened the SD card slot, found it empty. Robert bagged the camera, marked another GPS waypoint. According to his device, he was now 0.4 miles from Hannah's last coordinates. But the landscape ahead had changed. The ravine deepened, and ahead he could see a cliff face covered in thick moss, water seeping from cracks in the basalt. No easy way forward. "I knew you'd come." Hannah's voice. Behind him. Robert spun, his hand going to the bear spray, his heart hammering against his ribs. Nothing. Just moss-covered trees and the endless drip of condensation. He forced himself to breathe slowly, to think through the panic. His therapist had explained this, had prepared him for it. The entity, whatever it was, fed on fear, on the stress response. It mimicked voices to trigger that response, to break down rational thought. "You left, Trevor," Hannah's voice continued, seeming to come from multiple directions now. "You ran away while he needed you. Are you going to run again?" "You're not real," Robert said aloud, his voice steadier than he felt. "You're not Hannah. Hannah doesn't know about Trevor." Silence answered him. Then, from ahead, "But I know, Robert. I know everything about you. I know why your wife left. I know what you did in these woods 3 years ago. I know what you're too afraid to remember." Robert kept moving forward, refusing to engage. Engaging meant acknowledging it, and acknowledging it gave it power. He focused on physical sensations, the weight of his pack, the ache in his calves, the bite of cold air in his lungs. Real things, measurable things. The cliff face loomed ahead, 30 feet of vertical basalt slick with moss and seepage. To the left, the ravine deepened into a gorge. To the right, a narrow ledge wound around the cliff, barely wide enough for one person. Robert approached the ledge, tested the moss with his boot. Slippery but passable. He was halfway across when he heard the singing. Not words, not exactly. A melody that felt ancient, rising and falling like wind through the trees. It came from above, from the top of the cliff, and despite every instinct screaming at him to ignore it, Robert looked up. A woman stood at the cliff's edge. She wore clothing from another era, a dress that might have been white once, now stained with moss and earth. Her long hair hung in wet ropes around her face. She was smiling, and that smile was wrong. Too wide, showing too many teeth, stretching her face into something that no longer looked quite human. "Welcome back, Robert," she said in his mother's voice. Then Hannah's voice. Then Trevor's. Then voices he didn't recognize, a dozen of them speaking in unison. "We've been waiting so long." Robert pressed himself against the cliff face, his boot slipping slightly on the ledge. The woman above didn't move, didn't blink. She just stood there, smiling, her dress billowing in a wind that Robert couldn't feel. "Where's Hannah?" he managed to ask. "Where Trevor is. Where they all are. Where you'll be soon." The voices layered over each other, creating harmonics that hurt to hear. "You can't save her, Robert. You couldn't save any of them, but you can join them. Wouldn't that be nice? No more nightmares, no more guilt, just peace, deep in the earth where the roots grow. Show me Hannah, show me she's alive." The woman's smile widened impossibly further. "Alive? What a strange word. Are you alive, Robert? Are you sure? Or did you die 3 years ago when you followed my voice into the deep woods? Maybe you've been dead all along, just walking and walking, looking for something you'll never find." Robert's grip on the cliff face tightened. The woman's words burrowed into his mind like parasites, finding the soft places where doubt lived. What if he had died? What if this entire 3 years had been nothing but the dying hallucination of a man who'd gotten lost in the woods, following a voice that promised answers? No. His hand found the compass in his pocket. Solid. Real. The needle pointing north, always north, unchanging and true. He focused on that, on the weight of it, on the certainty it represented. "You're not real," he said. "You're something that feeds on fear, on doubt. You're the thing that took Trevor, but you won't take me." The woman tilted her head, the movement too fluid, too boneless. "Oh, Robert, I already have. I took you the moment you stepped into my woods. Every step you've taken, you've been walking deeper into me. There is no out. There is no Hannah to save. There's only the forest, and the forest is hungry." She stepped off the cliff. She didn't fall. She descended smoothly, impossibly, her feet finding purchase on the sheer rock face as if gravity had no claim on her. Within seconds, she was at his level, standing on the ledge 3 feet away, still smiling that horrible smile. "Give me your hand," she said in his wife's voice, Jennifer, who he hadn't spoken to in 2 years. "I can make the pain stop. I can show you where they all went. Don't you want to know?" Robert did want to know. God help him, he wanted to know so badly it ached. 3 years of unanswered questions. 3 years of guilt that sat in his chest like a stone. 3 years of wondering if he could have done something different, been something more. But he also wanted to find Hannah. And that want, that need to save someone this time, was stronger than his curiosity about oblivion. "No," he said. The woman's smile vanished. Her face twisted, the features running like wax, reforming into something that had never been human. Her eyes went black, her mouth opening to reveal not teeth but moss and roots and darkness. She lunged for him. Robert pushed off the ledge. He fell 10 feet before hitting the ravine's slope, rolling, his pack taking most of the impact. Branches whipped his face, tore at his jacket. He grabbed for anything to slow his descent, his gloved hands finding a root system, pulling, stopping himself short of the bottom where water pooled black between stones. Above him, the thing that had been a woman watched from the ledge. It didn't follow. It just stood there, head cocked, as if considering its next move. Then it turned and walked back along the ledge, disappearing around the cliff face. Robert lay in the mud, breathing hard, taking stock. No broken bones. Pack intact. GPS miraculously unshattered. He pulled himself up, checked his position. He'd fallen roughly 50 feet south of his intended path, but he was also now on the other side of the cliff. The ravine bottom offered a path forward, following a small stream that flowed toward the coordinates Hannah had sent. He activated his GPS tracker's emergency beacon. Even if his radio wasn't working, the beacon would transmit his location to satellites, to the dispatch center, to anyone looking for him. Then he started following the stream. The water here was strange. Too dark, too thick, flowing in a way that defied normal hydraulics. Robert tried not to think about what it might contain. He focused instead on signs of Hannah. Any footprint, any disturbed moss, any indication she'd come this way. The forest grew stranger the deeper he went. Trees twisted in impossible directions, their bark spiraling like DNA helixes. Fungi grew in geometric patterns on their trunks, perfect hexagons and pentagons, like something had designed them rather than evolved them. The moss glowed faintly in the dimming light, bioluminescence that shouldn't exist in these species. Robert's psychiatrist had warned him about this, how stress and fear could distort perception, make the mundane appear supernatural. But this felt different. This felt deliberate, as if the forest itself was trying to tell him something, show him something. His GPS beeped. 100 meters to Hannah's coordinates. The stream led him into a grove unlike anything he'd seen before. The trees here were ancient beyond measure, their trunks so massive that 10 men holding hands couldn't encircle them. Moss hung from branches like curtains, creating chambers and corridors in the green half-light. And in the center of the grove, Carved into the largest tree was a hollow, a vertical opening 6 feet high, 4 feet wide, deep enough that Robert couldn't see the back of it. Hannah sat just inside the opening. She was alive. Her chest rose and fell with breath. Her eyes were open, but she didn't move, didn't acknowledge Robert's approach. She just sat there, staring ahead at nothing, her camera gone, her hands resting in her lap, moss beginning to grow on her jacket. Hannah? Robert approached slowly, watching for any sign of the entity. Hannah, can you hear me? No response. Her eyes didn't track him. She was breathing. He could see that. But nothing else indicated consciousness. It was like looking at a person-shaped shell, something that had once contained Hannah Mitchell but was now just waiting. Robert knelt beside her, checked her pulse. Strong and steady, faster than resting should be. Her pupils were dilated, her skin cool but not dangerously cold. No obvious injuries. But when he touched her shoulder, she didn't react at all. Hannah, I'm going to get you out of here. He pulled the emergency blanket from his pack, wrapped it around her shoulders. Can you stand? Can you hear me at all? Her lips moved. Robert leaned closer, straining to hear. It showed me, she whispered, her voice distant, dreamy. Everything, the whole forest, all at once, every tree, every life, every death. I can't stop seeing it. Seeing what? The pattern, the way it's all connected, the roots underneath, older than the trees, older than the mountains. They're not roots. They're it. The whole forest is one organism, and we're walking on its skin. Her eyes finally focused on Robert, but the look in them was terror mixed with wonder. It let me see because it wanted me to understand. Before it fed, Robert's blood turned to ice. Fed? It doesn't kill. It transforms. Takes the things it catches and makes them part of itself. Trevor Morrison is still here, Robert. He's in the trees. He's in the moss. He's in the voice you heard calling you 3 years ago. He's still aware, still conscious, but he's it now and it's him and there's no separating them anymore. We're leaving. Robert tried to lift her, but Hannah grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. You can't leave. Don't you understand? We're already part of it. The moment we breathed its spores, the moment we drank water from its streams, the moment we touched its bark. It's patient. It can wait years, but eventually, everyone who enters deep enough becomes part of the forest. That's the entity talking. It's trying to make you believe. No. Hannah's grip tightened. I'm still me. For now. But I can feel it growing, Robert. Inside my lungs, in my bloodstream, mycelium. It's beautiful and terrible, and I don't want it, but I don't want to lose it either. Because once you've seen the pattern, everything else seems so small and brief and meaningless. Robert pulled away from her, standing, backing up. This was how it won, not by taking you all at once, but by getting inside you, changing you slowly from within, making you want to stay. If there's still you in there, then we can fix this. Get you to a hospital. Can they remove me from myself? Hannah's laugh was bitter and beautiful. I am the infection now, and so are you. 3 years ago, when you followed the voice, when you breathed deep in the deep woods, it's been growing in you all along. That's why you hear the voices. That's why you can never leave these forests, not really. Part of you is already rooted here. The thing Robert had been refusing to acknowledge, the truth he'd buried under therapy and medication and desperate rationalization, finally surfaced. He'd known something had changed 3 years ago. He'd felt it in quiet moments, a strange connection to the forest, an ability to navigate that went beyond skill, a sense of presence that he'd attributed to trauma. We're both infected, he said quietly. Everyone who comes here is infected, some faster than others, some never deep enough for it to take hold. But you and me, we went deep. We breathed deep. We're hers now. Hers? Hannah pointed up toward the canopy. The Whispering Woman. That's what the Ho people called her, before they stopped coming to these groves, before they marked them as forbidden. She's not a ghost, Robert. She's the forest made manifest, the collective consciousness of billions of organisms, all connected through the mycelial network, all feeding each other information and nutrients and purpose. She's what happens when life grows so interconnected that it develops a will. Robert looked up. The canopy above seemed to move, though there was no wind. Patterns shifted in the moss, in the lichen, in the way the light filtered through. And for just a moment, he saw it. The pattern Hannah described, the massive intelligence that lived in the soil and the bark and the spores, ancient and patient and hungry and nurturing all at once. What does she want? He asked. To grow, to spread, to connect everything. Hannah's voice was fading, growing softer. Humans are just another species to incorporate. We have mobility she lacks, but we have roots too. Our civilizations, our families, our connections. She wants those. She wants to spread beyond the old growth, into the logged areas, into the cities, into everything. Then why let anyone leave? Why not take everyone who enters? Because fear spreads faster than spores. Every person who escapes telling stories, warning others, they bring more. Curious people, brave people, strong people, better hosts. Hannah's eyes were glazing over again. She's patient. She can wait centuries, a few hikers every year, a ranger every decade. Eventually enough of them will carry her out, will plant her in new soil, will breathe her into the world. Robert's mind raced through the implications. If this was true, if the forest was a conscious entity capable of long-term strategy, then warning people wouldn't help. It would be part of the plan. And if he and Hannah were infected, then leaving meant potentially spreading it further. But staying meant... There's a third option, Hannah said, reading his face. You can burn it. The core. If you destroy this grove, you set the network back centuries, maybe longer. Maybe enough that humans develop defenses, learn to recognize the signs. Burn. Robert looked at the massive trees, the centuries of growth. The environmental damage would be catastrophic, and she knows you won't do it, because you're a ranger, because you've dedicated your life to protecting these forests, because the part of you that's already hers won't let you. She was right. The thought of burning this grove, of destroying trees that had stood for half a millennium, made him physically ill. It went against every instinct, every value, every principle he'd built his career on. Or, Hannah continued, you can join us. Accept it. Let the transformation complete. It's not death, Robert. It's transcendence. You'll be part of something vast, something beautiful. You'll never be lonely again. Never be afraid. Never be separate. For a long moment, Robert stood there, caught between choices that all ended in horror. Burn the grove and become the kind of person he'd always despised. Leave and risk spreading the infection to the outside world. Stay and lose himself to something ancient and inhuman. Then he remembered something his father had told him, the day he'd given him the compass. When you're lost, son, and every direction seems wrong, remember, you're not looking for the right way. You're looking for your way. Robert pulled out his radio. It crackled with static, but underneath he could hear voices, dozens of them, hundreds maybe, all whispering, all calling his name. He turned it off. Then he walked to Hannah, knelt down, and looked her in the eyes. I'm not going to burn the grove, he said, and I'm not going to join you, and I'm not going to leave you here. Then what? I'm going to do what I should have done 3 years ago. I'm going to trust that I'm still me, that you're still you, and that being infected doesn't mean being defeated. We're going to walk out together, and if the voices follow, we'll ignore them. If the entity tries to stop us, we'll keep walking. And if we spread it to the outside world, he helped her stand, supporting her weight, then humanity will have to deal with it, because hiding from it hasn't worked, and burning it would make me something